All right, I am here to show you a very basic implementation of my Gait Locomotion system plugin, which is going to be available here on Patreon. Maybe it come available on Marketplace eventually, but we'll see. So just, standard plugin setup. You'd go to your plugins and then look for it. Under this case, it's animation plugin, so it's going to be right here. Activate that, restart your project. After that, this is just a tour of the example project that I'm going to give you because it's a little bit easier than just starting from scratch. But it is pretty easy to set up. So the main piece is that the primary animation graph you're going to want to make is you'll want to go to, animation blueprint and choose whatever skeleton you're going to do. Oops. And of course I make a mistake right off the start. And right here, choose that. And then you can change your parent class right here to something like, Gait Camera Anim Instance, which is a different one I'll show you later. The animation instance, which is the main anim instance we're going to be talking about. And then the layer anim instance, which is the sub part of that. So the first part of it is the main animation instance that you're going to want to create. And then you'll also want to create one of the layer instance. And then the third thing you want to create before you go any further is the animation layer interface itself. So this is set up similar to Lyra, but there's a lot of things under the hood that are going to be written different and perhaps better. So in here we have, you can make all of your layers like you normally would. You just create this animation layer interface, and then when you create a state, you have categories and you have inputs. And in this instance, we're not going to have inputs for quite a few of these, like your idle state, start state, cycle state, stop, pivot, sprint. And a lot of these are optional, and I'll show you how to use more of them later or create more of them later. And then you have the start state, apex, fall land, fall loop, jump loop, additives, aiming, and skeletal controls. And you'll notice that aiming does have inputs. This is really only necessary right now because the option, I guess, is there of using aim offsets. Although I will be recommending a lot of people use Dragon IK and the aim solver, and then the animation component with this will come with a thread safe replicated aim solver. So it's kind of just an easy way of doing that and eliminating the overhead of having aim offset animations for everything, which is kind of a pain. So yeah, come in here and then you'll make one of these and add whatever states you start with. I would start with just a idle state and a cycle state when I first start creating. You don't need anything extra, and that's kind of what this basic blueprint's going to go over. So I'm just going to open the state machine itself. So you just create a state machine, and in here I have my idle state, my cycle state, and my sprinting state. Sprinting obviously can be set in different ways. By default in my system, it's usually picked up by gas through property mapping. So that's like one of the better ways to do it is through gas. The other way is setting it through the blueprint thread safe update animation. You can also set it in that method, and it works just the same. Or otherwise you just have, idle, cycle, however you're going to do this. But the thing about this tool is it's mainly meant as a tool, not as a template. And that confuses a lot of people at first because, first of all, the documentation is basically just an owner's manual. It tells you what it does. It doesn't tell you how to use it. And in that, you get the example project. So the example project will show you a bunch of different use cases of that, as well as my tutorials. So in this, we just have our idle state, and then we have our update idle state going on in this, which is just the update animation function. If you ever want to find out, well, like, how do I know this exists? Well, there is pretty much everything exposed within variables, first of all. So if you go down here to variables and then Gait Loco, there's a ton of variables in here. And in the layer there's going to be even more because you can access the parent graph, which is this one, and then grab all of the other variables from that as well. So there's a ton of stuff here that's thread safe and really, really easy to use in your blueprint thread safe updates to make your own logic if there's something beyond that the system doesn't offer for an edge case. So where is that? There's Gait Loco as another category. And then in there, this is where there's also functions. So this is where you can see the transitional rules and update functions and different things like that. Actually, I have a feeling this update function's somewhere else. It might be an update function, so it might only be able to be called from in here. Yeah. See, there's anim node functions as well. I didn't notice that was collapsed. So in there, this is where all the update states are. And you can read what they do just by hovering over everything, every variable, everything in this is going to be commented and tell you exactly what it's doing under the hood. So you don't have to open C++, which is really nice. And again, all these are optional. If you're not using starts and stops and pivots, then you don't need any of these. Idle state is only if you're using the turn, like the turn in place method that is done through Lyra, which is how this one's currently set up. But I'm also working on a procedural turn in place right now that will effectively eliminate that because it's not as good. It eliminates animations from the budget, first of all, and the control rig is just better at doing the turn in place. It's far more flexible. So this node will get replaced and that function will get eliminated in pretty soon. It's one of the first things on the roadmap. But yeah, primarily what you do is once you make your animation layer instance, then you can call idle state by just going like this. And it'll come up right here. And then once you hook that up, it'll turn into this. And essentially what these act like, if I had to kind of say it in a sense, is like a cartridge. So this doesn't actually house any animations. It's just a state saying that this state exists. And when in this state, I'm going to load this linked layer, if that makes sense. So I'm going to load this cartridge when this state is occurring. And you can create branching data in here, but I wouldn't for the most part. When I do or would, it would be with additives or something like that. And that's additive lean angle for that one, or for sprint, the same kind of thing. You'd want an additive lean angle because when you're running, you want to be able to lean left and right, right? So pretty simple stuff. What gets you from idle to cycle is just a property access of is not idle. And you are idle if you're idle, really, really easy on this basic graph, which again, doesn't mean it's bad because it's really good at reducing the animation budget and still making some really good results. So for simple stuff, can save you a lot of overhead. In here, just, is sprinting if you're sprinting, is not sprinting if you're not sprinting. Really simple again. When you get in air is what's known as a conduit, or this is, a state alias. And then the state alias will say, well, I came from idle, cycle, or sprinting. These are the three things that are allowed to enter into this state alias. And when they enter into this, then there's transitional rules that happen. So what happens is if you is jumping, then you're clearly jumping. Whereas if you're falling, you're falling. So the differentiation obviously is if your Z velocity is greater than 0. So if you're going up, then you're jumping. And if you're not, then you're falling, right? So pretty simple there. And otherwise, all it is jump will transition to fall automatically based on the sequence player. So when the jump animation, the vertical jumping animation is done, it transitions into your fall loop. Similar with grounded. Grounded is an alias, which you can enter only by jump and fall loop. So whenever you're falling or whenever you're jumping, technically you could be interrupted and that ends your in air, right? So that's going to be is grounded. When you're grounded, then it's going to just check, do you have acceleration? Yes. Well, then I'm going to go to cycle. If you don't have acceleration, then I'm automatically going to enter idle alias. So these will just transition back to these 2 points. So this is just a cleaner method of doing this with using aliases and using conduits and stuff like that. This can be a really nice way of making your graph look good. And obviously you don't really have a lot of this stuff going on. You just kind of have a few nodes and you're like, this is fundamentally what happens. If you're in jump start, you're going to be doing this. If you're in jump fall or fall loop, you're going to be doing that, right? And it's a little abstract for people who first get into this, but I think that this is why this plugin is really nice, is because it makes it a lot easier to digest than Lyra, which is very complicated, especially as a blueprint. The Then you come into your upper body split, which is really easy. This is just going to apply an additive to your upper body, and I'll show you what that does later. But this can be good for like shooting a gun or something like that. You can have your upper body additive montage play that. And then you also have your upper body slot right there. And then that's just layered blend per bone using a blend mask. The blend mask is just the upper lower body split mask. This is a default mask, I believe, with Unreal now, so you don't have to make it at all, and you just select blend mask, change that mask thing right there, and set it up. Your full body additive pre-aim, and then it comes down to here to your aiming. Your aiming is another linked layer, but this is the one that has the inputs. And if you want the inputs to appear on the node, you have to put expose as pin. And if you want them to be attached to a property, which like property mapping, you just have to choose the property. So down here, there's aim pitch and aim yaw that will be coming with this as variables. Then you have your additive hit react. Pretty obvious what that is. Apply additive is going to play your additive layer. With this, you can apply a different amount of this. So I'll show what this does later, but basically if I turn this alpha up or down, it's going to apply more impact when I jump. So, you know, if you have a bow, for example, and you're landing, it'll throw your whole bow way off, which can be really bad and look really bad. Or like if you have a gun, it might go through your arm or something stupid. So sometimes it's nice to be able to have control of this alpha to just momentarily switch that out and say, you know, if you're holding this weapon, don't have this alpha effect because it's going to look janky, which you don't want. Then you have your full body slot, inertialization, which you want to occur way down the graph here. And then your last thing pretty much is your skeletal controls. And this is like your IK layer. Pretty much that's like the most things that go on in there. That's why it's labeled IK. And like I said, this turn in place will get replaced really soon with a control rig. And it'll do the exact same thing, just better and more flexible. What else is on this one? I think that's everything that I have to go over on this very basic one. It does cut down your animations a lot, which is really a huge advantage because you're not having to use the 25 animations from starts and stops, the 4 animations from pivots, not including if you do omnidirectional. There's just a lot there. And one of the things I am considering working on next is going to be a start-stop control rig as well. So that could be really beneficial. Because I like the idea of them, but I feel like the huge budget and the fact that most animation packs don't have that is kind of like, I don't know if I want to commit to that. Because I don't have an animation team. I don't know about you. Okay, so that's the main graph here. That's a really in-depth thing, I guess, on it, but I go over everything here. Like I said, the variables and the functions are something that you can just look up in this, and that's going to be one of the easier ways to find them, or I'll eventually have it all listed in the documentation, but it's going to be pretty excessive at that point. Like, I don't know why. When we get to here, the next part here is the animation instance layer, and this is where you set up the logic for those layers. So really quickly, I'm just going to go over a basic idle and cycle, because I feel like that's probably the easiest thing to do. So in idle, you basically have these on relevant and on update functions, and you'll be able to just call these like this, and they'll be under gait loco, anim node functions, on become relevant, or on update, and you'll be able to see every single one and what they do just by hovering over them and looking. And they're all optional, right? So if you have an idle state, then you're going to obviously need the on become relevant idle state one, because it's going to do something. What does it do? Well, it on become relevant idle state, choose idle break delay time and reset idle break transition logic. Do I need that? Do I have idle breaks in my thing? Do I have, does my character eventually just stop and smoke a cigarette or something like that? If he doesn't, well, then you don't need this. Same thing with like the update idle state, though, is probably going to be something important. State blending out, process idle. So this is going to be the same idle break transition thing. It's like if you're not using idle breaks, then you don't even need these two functions. And that's why I say everything's optional, and you should read everything because it's a tool, not a template. Once you get down to here, you have your sequence player. You can just call these by, rating sequence player. And then inside of there, you would create an onUpdate function that would be update your idle animation, right? And what that one's going to do is going to be very important, because update idle animation is going to update the current idle animation sequence, which will be your idle hip fire or your idle aiming or whatever like that. And I should actually write specifically the Booleans under the hood that are going to be affecting these, I suppose. So I'll do that soon. But right now, in this context, idle is only going to have idle or aiming. You're either going to be one of those two animations. Or with cycle, you'll either be walking or you'll be running. And that's based on your run speed. And your run speed is set right here. It's one of the few variables that has to float here. So this is depending on your walk cycle, run cycle. And it just says returns run speed, what velocity is the walk cycle blends into the run cycle. And then above that, you have sprinting, but sprinting is that Boolean that we've talked about before. And that just transitions you whether that gameplay ability or whether that Boolean's active, depending on how you activate it. And then, yeah, this sequence player is just going to play a sequence. And it doesn't have any specific sequence here, because this acts like a cartridge. And then the final kind of layer here before I move on is that when you actually make the layers, that's where the animations are stored that are going to get loaded in as a cartridge. So here's your idle ready. Here's your idle ready. If I had an aiming pose, it would be right here. And whatever. And you just kind of want to like fill up the slots that are going to be loaded, not necessarily they're going to be used, I would say. It's like some of them, like I'm not going to use pivots in this, so I don't care to have them in there at all. But if my character goes to aim for whatever reason, I don't want this to be an empty object. And then stance transitions, the other one, and this is pretty simple. This is just if your crouch state changed, then go into the stance transition, which is just going to be your entry and exit out of crouching. It's just again, on become relevant, does that thing, and then comes back, and it'll either transition automatically or it'll use this transitional rule right here, which is going to be the crouch state change. So that's the breakdown of the idle, which seems a little complicated, but it's not that bad. And then in the cycle state, which is the next part we'll go over here quick, this one's going to be easy. You have your upper body, or you have your your update cycle animation. This is the exact same thing as before. It's just a sequence player with update cycle animation, and it's either going to play your walk, your run, or your sprint, depending on the three things we just said. Then it's going to go into a hip fire upper body override. This I have fixed in a different patch, so I'm not exactly sure why this isn't set up like this, but this will be already set up in the example when I upload it tonight. And then there's just orientation and stride warping. This is pretty standard setup. Again, it's all done through thread safe updating and stuff like that, so it's quicker. And yeah, so this is a typical state, and I would say that because a lot of the states that you end up doing are going to look like this if they're a locomotion state. So let's say if you have a sliding state like Apex Legends does, where you're sliding down a hill or something like that, you'll have a sequence of you playing the sliding animation. You'll probably have this upper body override just in case you decide to aim while you're sliding. You may have two slightly different upper body states while you're sliding, so that you can override that and start aiming. And you might have orientation or slide or not stride warping, but you might have orientation warping if you want to like have a 90-degree straight slide where you're sliding forward, and then you want to be able to like turn 45 degrees either way. Then orientation warping would be a really good way of doing that and it not looking ugly. So, and I've done that before, so I know that it looks good. And then I guess the last state that I'll go through, because it's really super simple, is going to be, I don't even have it in here, sprint. And sprint would actually look identical to cycle. So that's why I wanted to show it to you, is because other than the upper body override, because you probably won't be sprinting and shooting or aiming, and that's the only reason you'd have the override. Otherwise, it would look the exact same. It would have a sequence player, it would have orientation warping, it would have stride warping, etc. So yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of the three basic animations that I have there are the 3 basic states inside of this. And then the last thing I'm going to go over, even though I know I'm going way over in my video time without knowing, is the jump. And the jump is going to be super easy. It's just going to be... Where are you hiding? The jump start is the first part, and it's just an upper body override with a sequence player playing the jump start sequence. And then we have the fall loop, which in this case is just the jump fall loop, and then doing the upper body override. And I believe that's the entire loop, because it's only these 2 layers. And this is a method that's good because a lot of animation packs that you buy will only have 3 animations, not 5 like Lyra is. And albeit Lyra is better because you can do predictive landing, which I'll go over in one of my next videos for the advanced stuff. You have to sew all of your animations together and kind of know what you're doing and cut them up in a certain way to make them work like that. And like I said, albeit better, you would either require an animator or a bit of animation skill to be able to pull that off well and quickly. So that's kind of why it's in the advanced one. And I still like having the 3 loop example or the 2 animation loop example, because it's way easier to get decent results for something that's like an AI or something, you know. I think that's everything I have to cover with this right now. Although I want to double check. This is in the character blueprint, in order to link an animation layer as well, you just want to delay until first tick on your testing, and then just link an animation layer, and you can just choose whatever animation layer you have here. But you do want to choose the one that has the animations you're trying to get to. So in this instance, it is very basic unarmed. And you can see that if I go to the jump is just jump, fall loop, and land. And these are the 3rd-person animations from the 3rd-person example. So that's kind of like, yeah, how that works. Yeah, I think that's everything I want to go over for this video. I hope I don't have to do this again.